Welcome to Cinema on a Shelf, a podcast about movies and physical media. My name is Matt, and thank you for spending some time with me. Instead of watching a movie, I promise I will try to make it worth your time. And I guess in this case, it's probably some kind of spooky, scary movie. I don't know, we are just getting to the end of that time of year, but thank you for joining me anyways. And there's a little bit of a theme to the whole spooky, scary movie idea today, in that we are going to be discussing a boutique Blu-ray and 4K label that does kind of specialize in that kind of movie. This is going to be the second of my label discovery episodes. The last episode I did was about the Indicator label from Powerhouse Films. And in this one, I wanted to talk about a label that I am actually quite familiar with, but I'm still doing a label discovery about it. And I can talk a little bit about that, I guess, probably right off the hop here. But for those new to the podcast, the label discovery episodes that I do, they're all about me checking out a new physical media label to me. And I kind of alluded that the one we're going to be talking about, which is Vinegar Syndrome, is not really a new one to me. And we'll get into a little bit of why that is a little bit down the road here. But Vinegar Syndrome is a label that has been around for a little bit of time now, and I think it's a really interesting one to dive into. So let's do that. So Vinegar Syndrome is a US-based home video distributor. They primarily release Region A Blu-rays and also 4K discs, which are natively region-free, but the Blu-rays that they do release are Region A specifically, and they are based in the United States, as you would imagine, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They were founded in 2012, so the label has been around for approximately 13 years at this point. Originally, when they were founded, they started out doing both DVD and Blu-ray releases. They really don't do a lot of DVD releases anymore. It's, like I said, primarily Blu-rays and 4Ks at this point in time. They also have one of the best names in all of the boutique Blu-ray space, Vinegar Syndrome. It's a really striking name and kind of just a really cool sounding name. And it is actually named after a chemical reaction that affects film stock, especially old film stock, over time. It's a process that basically leads to deterioration of the film, and as part of that, the film itself kind of crinkles in certain spots. I haven't actually seen film that's gone through this process that the Vinegar Syndrome refers to. But the, I guess, real telltale sign and where the name comes from is that the film actually smells kind of acrid, almost like vinegar. So it was given the name Vinegar Syndrome. I believe the chemical reaction happens to film stocks that are stored in places with a lot of moisture, which is why if you ever hear about old celluloid film canisters being stored in a like dry, cool place or somewhere that's locked away and has a lot of like dehumidification going on, that's the reason, is so that it doesn't sort of suffer this fate of having the film degrade and smell like vinegar. So you don't want Vinegar Syndrome normally, but in this case, if you're a fan of the sort of films that they do, you do want Vinegar Syndrome. But yeah, it's a very, very cool name, really fun branding on the label. The logo of it kind of has something to do with a little bit of their early origins, I guess. And the origins of the Vinegar Syndrome label back in 2012, 2013 is that they began releasing restored versions of older X-rated films. this included a lot of different types of films back when the X rating was a thing. Now it's termed as something else. It's termed as NC-17, but a lot of them were sort of cult movies, exploitation movies, horror movies, some action movies if they had maybe certain elements to them, and sex films, which sort of again refers to some older films that potentially could have been classified as pornography at the time. And any film that would kind of fall into these classifications are what Vinegar Syndrome kind of got their start doing, and really to this day is the thing that they are kind of most known for, is to these type of kind of lower budget films that are given a real loving addition. Most of the films that they do release, and the ones they started out releasing when they first came around, were primarily from the eras between the 1960s and the 1980s, which is kind of a, I guess you would call it a golden age of cult and exploitation films in a lot of ways. And, those looked very, very different from the 60s, where you were filming these things on maybe lower budget film cameras, all the way to the 80s, where you're shooting more on video, like low budget or low grade, I guess you would call it, like Super 8 video and that sort of thing. So this is the era that Vinegar Syndrome kind of started out as being primarily most interested in doing releases for. So I brought them up in a previous episode in talking about genre and ways to collect by certain genres. And one genre that does really, really well in the collector space is the low budget horror, the sort of schlocky horror film. So many of them have a real resurgence on physical media, and labels like Vinegar Syndrome are a real big reason for that. They give real loving additions with really wonderful, upscaling restoration purposes, and they really do preserve these types of films that were for a long time really neglected and kind of, very, very niche. And even though they still are quite niche, these physical media releases that they do of them really do highlight them as something special. And they may not necessarily be for everyone, but the treatment they're given by Vinegar Syndrome is really commendable. As far as the additions and the way that they do a lot of their releases, they typically will go into a pattern where they release a limited edition of any of the films that they're releasing first, and then also a standard edition that they do mostly concurrently right out of the gate. But the limited versions are usually a little bit more expensive. They usually have a slipcover as part of the release. Sometimes it is just the unique slipcover with some alternative artwork to it. Sometimes it includes, more booklets or more non-disc extras. They may also include thicker boxes, especially if it's a box set limited edition. The one thing about Vinegar Syndrome, and I can actually say this right up front, Vinegar Syndrome is absolutely known for the high quality slipcovers that they do. Most of the time, before discovering a lot of the boutique label slipcovers, you would see the very, very generic kind of thin, flimsy cardboard slipcovers that major labels and studios would often do. And they can be quite nice as well, but often they were just sort of a little bit of an extra thing to kind of protect the cases. I actually was always a little bit confused by certain releases having a slipcover with them having exactly the same artwork. I was never really 100% sure what exactly that was for or who it was appealing to. And I know a lot of labels still do these, and I do really like them. They look good on a shelf. They do protect a case relatively decently from like getting scratches on the plastic part of it, but it didn't really add anything necessarily, and I'm not sure that any slipcase necessarily really adds something to a release, unless you're doing something like what Vinegar Syndrome does, and their kind of alternate artwork cases are really quite nice. They're also very thick. I feel like, and I should actually look into exactly what goes into this, but their slip covers almost feel like they're a double fold, like they're doubly thick, and maybe it's just the type of cardstock they use. A good number of their slip covers are done on that sort of like matte finish cardstock, so they already do look really nice, but a lot of times they have really specific artwork that goes with it. Maybe it's from an alternative poster or an international poster. Maybe it's art that they've commissioned from an artist to do like a representation of the films. They really are well known as having some of the best slipcovers in the physical media business. So if you have one of these editions, I think you probably know what I mean as far as the high quality of the slipcover. And it's something that I took note of and I thought was a really nice touch for what they do. And the limited edition versions, if you're able to get them on their website, are usually not a whole bunch more expensive. They are a little bit more expensive, but you're not doubling the price of the release or anything like that. They're just a nice little extra to have as part of it if you get in on a release early, potentially, because a lot of times, though, the limited edition will be the first version of this release to sell out, and then they will have standard versions available as well. Giving a little bit more of a backstory to Vinegar Syndrome as a label, the very first release that they ever did was actually a box set release, interestingly enough, with 3 films that were all directed by a person named Herschel Gordon Lewis. All of them kind of more older sexploitation sex films. The box set release itself was called The Lost Films of Herschel Gordon Lewis. And it's very unique for a label to come out of the gate swinging with a box set. Very unique in that way, but it was, I think, pretty well received pretty early on, and obviously has set them on the course to be quite successful for the next 12 to 13 years. And in fact, they have worked on restoring and preserving over 500 films according to their website. And this is the boast that they make, is that this is more than any other independent studio, which does make some sort of sense. A lot of times the restoration and preservation of films often will come from, an entity outside of a boutique label. I know some of them will definitely get themselves involved with the restoration aspect of things, but Vinegar Syndrome has done this right out of the gate for their entire life cycle. They have worked with a lot of different organizations that are involved with film in different ways. Places like the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Academy Film Archive, the Library of Congress, which is well known for their restoration efforts, UCLA Film School. They are also a really, really large name in film preservation and restoration, as well as many, many others. So they really have worked very closely with all these organizations to kind of cement themselves in this whole physical media world and restoration of films world. And part of the reason they've been able to do this is because they work with an in-house lab partner called OCN Digital Labs and Distribution. And they are the group that kind of takes on all of their preservation efforts. So anything from the lowest of the low budget horror movie and action movie and sexploitation movie that they do, up to some of the films they do now, which are more involved with like major labels, and some films that maybe were out of print for a long time from the original studio, and Vinegar Syndrome has picked up the rights to make a certain edition of it. The OCN basically is the group that does all of these restoration efforts, and because of that, The quality control is really close to home with them, from what I can understand. And from what I have seen from Vinegar Syndrome stuff, the restorations are really excellent. It seems like they are of really high quality, and everything that I've looked at online as far as how things look, what sort of presentations they're putting out there for these films. A lot of times these films haven't really existed in wonderful formats, and sometimes these are the best that they have ever looked. It looked probably even better than they were if they were shot on Super 8 video in the 80s, for example. So they certainly do have a reputation in the restoring of films as being some of the best in the business. So something that is really unique about Vinegar Syndrome as a company is that they don't just exist to create films and physical media versions in the Vinegar Syndrome label. They actually branch out quite a bit more than any other boutique Blu-ray label that I know of, in that they actually have many different sub-labels and also partnered labels, which is a little more of where I'm more familiar with Vinegar Syndrome, which we'll get to in a second. But they, even within their quote-unquote main line of films, the Vinegar Syndrome films, they do have several of these sub-labels that kind of have almost like little niches within their own niche. So, like I said, a lot of what the Vinegar Syndrome titles are the cult exploitation horror action films from the 60s to the 80s. These sub-labels cover things that are either within that niche or maybe kind of just adjacent to that niche in some way. And it's really interesting that they have so many of them. And these have obviously grown over time over the 13 years that they have been around. But these include, talking specifically, I guess, about the Vinegar Syndrome sub-labels for starters. They have ones like Vinegar Syndrome Archive, which they term as forgotten oddities from the video store era. So films that really were kind of a direct-to-video type of release that maybe didn't have any kind of theatrical release at all, or were a little more relegated to the dusty back shelves of a horror movie section in a small town, video store. Anybody that is my age that grew up in the 80s and 90s will know the phenomenon of the video store, and the small mom and pop video stores that maybe weren't the Blockbusters and Gone Hollywood Videos and that sort of thing. And they sometimes just had the weirdest movies because they were maybe cheap to get in or filled a niche for a small amount of people that would watch them. So the Vinegar Syndrome Archive sub-label sort of covers some of these types of films. There is also Vinegar Syndrome Pictures, which specifically focuses on releases that are a little bit newer, mostly kind of within the last 10 years. And sometimes they even have had a hand in financing some of these films getting made. So over the course of Vinegar Syndrome being around, obviously influencing a lot of newer filmmakers making new films, the Vinegar Syndrome Pictures sub-label is kind of where that falls under. They also have undertaken what I would kind of term as some quote-unquote bigger studio releases, and this goes under their Vinegar Syndrome Ultra sub-label. And it's kind of these bigger studio releases, a lot of them from the 80s and 90s that maybe, again, don't quite fit in the niche, but sort of do in certain ways. To give you an idea, some of the films that they have in the Vinegar Syndrome Ultra line, films like Roadhouse, starring Patrick Swayze from the 80s, film like Showgirls, the Paul Verhoeven 90s sexploitation, tongue-in-cheek satirical film, film like Congo from the 90s, Sidekicks, the Chuck Norris martial arts film vehicle. There's a lot more, actually, and this is a line that is a little bit newer as they've grown a little bit in stature and have been able to work with some of these larger studios to release these versions under the Vinegar Syndrome Ultra line. And all of these releases in the Ultra line so far have been in 4K. So I think that's maybe a little bit of the mandate behind that sub-label. You also have Vinegar Syndrome Labs, which what is the line they call a testing area for genres and eras they don't normally work within. And this line actually is, to me personally, maybe the most fascinating. They seem to kind of have a lot of these like all over the place type of releases in the Vinegar Syndrome Labs sub-label. Everything from, like I said, wild genres across different eras. But they all do seem to have a little bit of a tie to something that seems a little more familiar to Vinegar Syndrome. I'm actually going to get into talking about one of these films a little later in this episode because it was one of the films that I sampled as part of my label discovery. Kind of an interesting, way for them to quote unquote take a chance on something. They also do have 3 other labels that are not named Vinegar Syndrome, but they term as a sub-label to Vinegar Syndrome. One of them is Degosser Video, which specializes in shot-on-video genre films. So where a Vinegar Syndrome archive and a Degosser Video, where they cross over, or what distinguishes one from another, I'm not 100% sure. I haven't really been able to dive into either of them, but that's sort of the designation they give to Degosser Video. There's also, this is a very difficult one to pronounce, Distrib-Pix. I think I'm getting that right, which looks more specifically at sort of the sexploitation film aspect of their back catalog, and because I think it's probably the one that goes back to some of their roots of producing some of the older X-rated films that they founded the company on. They also have one called Cinematograph, which is a line named after a term used by the famous French Lumiere brothers that were really involved in very, very early quote-unquote films, and they use the term cinematograph as part of that. And this is a line that they say is what they're calling filling gaps in the canon of American cinema. So these films in cinematograph are a little bit more of not necessarily traditional films, but a lot of them that have been released by, again, bigger studios, similar to the Vinegar Syndrome Ultra line, but they don't necessarily fit into a genre fare like Vinegar Syndrome. These are ones that could really be termed as kind of like lost classic films in a lot of ways. And I actually don't want to dive too much into Cinematograph just yet, because I do want to do a label discovery episode about Cinematograph, because this is the type of film that really appeals to me. One thing I will say about Vinegar Syndrome stuff, it's a label that on whole, the films they release aren't necessarily always the type of films that I personally am super interested in. I'm not a huge horror movie fan. The lower budget film kind of so bad it's good appreciation is not always something that I'm down with or interested in checking out. Some of them I have, and some of them are great. But the Cinematograph line is something that really does interest me, and I'm really looking forward to doing an episode to diving into it specifically in a label discovery. So part of, again, me doing this as a label discovery was to branch out a little bit, to get out of my comfort zone, even though the films that I did check out were kind of within my comfort zone in a lot of ways. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I did mention that I was quite familiar with Vinegar Syndrome, and the reason is because of their partner labels. And their partner label list is really quite extensive. So because of the way Vinegar Syndrome has, created the space for itself of doing its own restoration work with OCN Digital Labs and Distribution as part of the company, they really have been able to, have this process that a lot of time was the domain of researchers or studios or companies that are funded a little bit differently to do these huge restoration projects. because they've set themselves up with some experts and the equipment to do these sorts of things, they have had the ability to really entice different groups and different labels either to approach them or come to them and branch out as part of their partner label program. And at this point in time, it's been so successful that there really is too many labels to name that are part of their partner program. Over 40 partner labels at this point are listed on the Vinegar Syndrome website. They are all, working with OCN on the distribution, on the restoration, on the slipcovers and packaging. In fact, a lot of these partner labels do have that same kind of really nice, sturdy slipcover that the Vinegar Syndrome stuff does. And these partner labels do tend to have their own specific focuses and specializations, much like Vinegar Syndrome itself. I feel like they probably do encourage these partner labels to find their niche and really drill down into it. Now, these partner labels they can focus on maybe certain regional films. One that I am very, very familiar with is called Canadian International Pictures. And I don't want to talk too much about them because, boy, they're one of my favorites, and I really want to do an episode dedicated specifically to CIP. But they specifically look at films that have been made and created in Canada. They also have partner labels that do some genre film focus, certainly. Labels like Shudder or American Genre Film Archive, AGFA for short. They focus on sort of a specific type of genre that they want to, again, explore and drill down into a little bit. They do also have several lines that work with independent films. So ones that are, kind of names in their own right. IFC, for one. They have IFC Films as a partner label where they can release a lot of the independent films that IFC may have been producing themselves, may have been bringing to theaters, and now want to do a home video release for. IFC Films gives them an opportunity to do that. There are also labels like Icarus Films, which focus a lot on kind of pseudo-documentary and location-specific films. I do have a couple of Icarus films in my collection, which, again, might be something we talk about down the road. They also have areas and a label specifically that may focus on animation. The one that is a little bit newer to their partner label program is called Cartoona. And they have been releasing some really interesting animated films, some that aren't just traditional animation, some that maybe are stop motion animation. And I do have a recent release of theirs from a film that came out last year that was actually one of my favorite films of last year, one of the funniest films I've seen in a long time, called Hundreds of Beavers. It's one that did make a little bit of a splash in film festival circuits and things like that. They got a physical media release on Cartoona, which is absolutely wonderful. And I think they're doing, a lot to sort of have that spotlight on independent animated feature films. And there's many, many others in the partner labels. There honestly is so very much to discover, whether it's music documentaries, whether it's regular documentaries, whether it's, foreign films. Film Movement is another label, sub-label of their partner label, that focuses a lot on foreign film. There is a lot to discover in the Vinegar Syndrome partner labels, and it's why I'm much more familiar with them, because I actually have far more partner label releases from Vinegar Syndrome than actual Vinegar Syndrome releases, which made it really interesting to kind of undertake this episode and quote unquote discover the mainline Vinegar Syndrome label for myself, despite me being really familiar with them as a company. The other thing that's kind of unique about them as a company, and I have mentioned this in a previous episode about, collecting your way, they are a physical media label. They do produce Blu-rays, 4Ks that are distributed to different places, sold in different places. But they also have several brick and mortar physical locations across North America, which is very unique. And I really am not sure if there is many other labels that have this sort of thing Some, may have like one location where they're headquartered, but they have several with Vinegar Syndrome. So because they were founded in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that's where their head office is. I believe OCN is stationed there as well. They have a store called The Archive in Bridgeport, which effectively is like a storefront that is part of their operation. And they do sell a lot of their editions and physical media releases at the Archive. I've never been to the Archive myself, but having looked at pictures of it, it's kind of again a neat little operation and a fun way to put their stuff out there. Outside of the Archive, they do also have now 3 Vinegar Syndrome stores. They have one in Toronto, Ontario, up here in Canada. They have one in Denver, Colorado. And they have a new store in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so these stores are really wonderful, and I'm going to judge the Denver and Pittsburgh one based on the Toronto one, which I most recently was able to go to when I was in Toronto for the Toronto International Film Festival this year. Got a chance to go to the Roncesvalles Village area of Toronto, kind of a little bit west of downtown, and check out their store. And the store is not huge necessarily. In fact, it was even smaller when I was there because the basement, the downstairs with a lot of the records and VHS videos that they had was closed for renovation. So it just got to be in the upstairs. But the upstairs was absolutely packed. They had so many of the Vinegar Syndrome releases, sub-label releases, partner label releases. It was really quite overwhelming. Basically, if it is currently in print and maybe even just slightly out of print, they very likely had a copy of it at the store in Toronto. All really nicely laid out. Versions with the slip covers, so limited editions, versions without slip covers. They also had a lot of editions from other boutique labels. They had Criterion Collection stuff, they had Arrow Video stuff, they had A24 stuff, they had 88 Films imprint stuff, foreign stuff, different regions. If you had a region-free player, if I had a region-free player, I would have been really in trouble as far as how much I was spending. And they also do have a huge section of used films as well. So one of the things about their store that they show a lot of, especially in their social media on the Instagrams, all 3 of the stores do have an Instagram account. I believe the Archive probably does as well, although I'm not 100% sure about that. But they do show off a lot of the trade-ins that people will bring in. So there does seem to be a bit of a healthy community that they've cultivated around people bringing in older movies to trade in for either cash or trading credit. I'm not 100% sure how it works. I know how it works at some of the stores where I live. But it's kind of a neat little, way of promoting film and kind of being advocates for physical media without just being, a store where you get their stuff brand new and that's it. They did also have a lot of like really unique, kind of more expensive stuff. They had some of their own out of print stuff that is really, really hard to find. Some other like box set and collector editions of things that were really cool. Just a really, really good store, a really well curated experience, really friendly people. The store in Toronto as well. Shout out to the Vinegar Syndrome Toronto people. I may tag you in the Instagram story for this video. It was a really great experience, and I was able to pick up a lot of really, really interesting releases when I was at the store. And it just is a nice, extra thing to change the pace a little bit from their chief line of business, which is their online website. So the Vinegar Syndrome website, vinegarsyndrome.com, is kind of the chief way that they put their products out into the world. They do also, sell them at different other online retailers. I believe Orbit and Diabolic DVD both have Vinegar Syndrome stuff available. I'm sure they're available a lot of other places as well. I haven't really looked at any of the bigger retailers like Amazon or anything like that. But Vinegar Syndrome does a really good job with their website of curating a little bit of an online presence for collectors, which I think is one of the reasons why they probably are really well regarded with collectors. They do frequently, have like little flash sales here and there little pre-order bonuses. They do two big sales a year, one for Black Friday and one with halfway to Black Friday, so it's effectively 2 times a year. The Black Friday one is actually about to get underway. In fact, by the time this episode is out, the Black Friday pre-order is probably up. They do have a subscription model as well, that if you're really interested in picking up absolutely everything that they put out, then you can become a Vinegar Syndrome subscriber. So great for collectors that are more of the completist type of collector. And everything's really nicely laid out. They do also have some other merchandise, t-shirts, stickers. They do have Vinegar Syndrome Press as well, which puts out some books that are related to film, sometimes pressing some of their own stuff as well. It's a really good experience as far as the online shopping experience goes. And we'll talk a little bit more about them when I go into an episode of probably about sales and Black Friday. I think I'd maybe like to put something up before Black Friday, but that kind of takes me into the part where we're going to actually do some discovery of Vinegar Syndrome. So as with the previous labeled discovery episode, basically I have selected and then purchased 3 films from one of the Vinegar Syndrome, either the mainline and in this case one of their sub-labels. And I've chosen 3 films that I know kind of appeal to me. 2 of them I had already seen, and 1 I had not. But trying to take a look at exactly what they're doing, because like I said, I have a lot of familiarity with their partner labels, and wanted to see specifically what Vinegar Syndrome is doing. So as I talk about these 3 releases, just like before, I want to talk about the packaging that each one is coming in. I want to talk about the look and feel and sound of what it's like to watch the film and the special features, and then the special features themselves and the supplements and what's kind of offered by them and how it adds to the experience of watching the film on physical media. So the first of the films that I checked out from Vinegar Syndrome is the most recent of the 3 films that I checked out. And I mentioned, going to the Vinegar Syndrome store in Toronto. It's got some Canadian content in it. The film is Existenz from 1999, directed by the great Canadian body horror director David Cronenberg. This is a film that I saw around the time when it came out. I think I was in university, so it would have been a year or 2 afterwards. It stars a very young Jude Law, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Willem Dafoe. We have Don McKellar is in this film. There's quite a few kind of well-known actors, and especially character actors in the film. And at that point in time, David Cronenberg is several decades into his career. Existenz is not quite the full-on body horror film that some of his other films are, but it's a film that basically follows a group of characters, specifically the 2 main characters, Jude Law, Jennifer Jason Leigh, that are immersing themselves into a video game. And in this kind of futuristic setting, although it looks very normal on the surface, when you play a video game, you actually plug your entire body into the controller, which in Cronenberg fashion looks very much like it is a living, breathing, fleshy thing. It's again, this is one of the more normal David Cronenbergs if you've ever seen any of his films. And things kind of go on from there. It's a really interesting film. It actually is one I hadn't seen in a number of years and still holds up really well. A lot of the themes in it around video games, around people, around immersion, around technology, still really hold up. Actually, maybe even more so in the modern time, which is quite interesting and something they talk about in some of the special features for this release. So the release that I got was the standard edition. This is actually an edition that I believe is out of print now. I have had this for a few months. It is the 4K and Blu-ray edition. So the 4K disc has the film and the commentaries, and then the Blu-ray has the film commentaries as well as all of the other special features. So give you a bit of a rundown on, the how it looks. This is a film from 1999, so this is, a 25, 26-year-old film at this point. Digitally, the look of it always, had a kind of an interesting look, somewhat grotesque in spots, but also, kind of something that you wouldn't necessarily say is a high budget look to it. They're certainly doing a lot with a little, but it really does look very good. It looks very sharp. And, the everything that I'd read about Vinegar Syndrome, of having these really nice, preservation and restoration of their films, even on something newer like this that maybe wasn't the highest budget film in the world, but certainly wasn't the lowest budget, does look very, very good. So we can, I can really see that the look, feel, and sound of everything was very, very good. Sound specifically, there's a lot of kind of sound effects to go with a lot of the visual effects. There's a lot of practical visual effects, as David Cronenberg is known for doing. A few digital effects as well that they do go into, but the sound does really add something quite interesting to this film. The supplements for this release, frankly, are quite loaded. So in this film, there are 4 commentary tracks. One of them is brand new to this release. It's with film historian Dr. Jennifer Moorman. Then we have 3 what they call archival commentaries, or commentaries that were on previous releases. So one with the director, David Cronenberg, one with the cinematographer, Peter Shashitsky, and the visual effects supervisor, Jim Isaac, also provides a 4th commentary. I actually don't know if I have a release that has 4 commentaries on it. That's very interesting. I may have to go through my shelves and look at that, but a real wealth of commentary. And, as you can imagine, with 4 of them, I wasn't able to go through and listen to all of them, but did go through bits and pieces and listen to what a lot of these commentaries were saying. And did listen through a lot of David Cronenberg's commentary, and really, because they have such a different perspective with each of these people, there's a little bit of crossover in some of the stories between, say, the visual effects and the cinematographer, and with Cronenberg himself. But they do offer some really unique perspectives and some really unique insights that, makes that commentary track quite unique. So if listening to commentaries is your thing, you have a wealth of opportunity with this release. Outside of the commentaries, they do also include a number of interviews and a featurette that goes into what they offer here. Most of the interviews are one-to-one interviews, or interviews with one person specifically. And again, they do tend to focus on different areas of the film. So deep diving in, one of them is with art director Tamara Deverell, really looking at the art of the film. The film does take place in some of these very unique locations that really have a look and feel all, in and of themselves. At one point in time, you're in sort of a church looking building. You also have, a gas station. You have the inside of a Chinese food restaurant. You also have the inside of a amphibian butchery. Yeah, this is a David Cronenberg movie for sure. But a lot of these were filmed on set locations, and a lot of them were not very large, so they used these same sets again and again and just had to redress them. So Tamara had some really interesting insights and things about how they made them look and feel unique throughout the different locations in the film. Stephen Dupuis is the makeup artist for the film, and makeup effects artist, I guess you could say, because that does definitely mean something in a Cronenberg film. And he has worked with David Cronenberg several different times. He actually does go into some interesting backstories about how he got into the business and got to be working with David, and he really got to do some very interesting things because of David's vision for the type of films that he wants. Makeup effects and practical effects are kind of the thing that he really stands out for in a lot of his films. So he had a lot of really interesting things to say, as did the producer Robert Lantos, having a little bit more insight about kind of the specifics around the production aspect of things. There's also an interview with the opening title sequence designer, a gentleman by the name of Robert Pilichowski. And the opening titles for this film are kind of fun. It's a little bit of a throwback to some older Hollywood films with people like Maurice Jarre and Saul Bass that were really known for kind of these unique title sequences in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm thinking of films like Charade, Vertigo, North by Northwest. People like that, I think, were a really big inspiration to Pilichowski. And David Cronenberg has done some really interesting title sequences before, so it was neat to hear from him about that. One of the most interesting of the supplements that were on this disc is the featurette called The Art of Production Designer Carol Spire. And Carol Spire is, from all accounts, this legendary Canadian production designer who, it sounds like she did everything from very serious location dramas to period pieces, all the way down to David Cronenberg horror movies. And she really sounded like a really interesting personality, great professional who was able to have success in throughout her career in a wide variety of genres. It was really quite interesting to listen to. She also sounded like she had quite the personality as well. So that was a really fun watch after the film. They also had several other sort of archival interviews that were sort of those interviews that you would see sometimes in the 1990s, where they could be used as snippets for other, TV shows, or maybe interviewers that wanted to simulate asking questions to the actors and the directors and people. So they have these interviews, one with David Cronenberg, one with Jude Law, one with Jennifer Jason Leigh, one with Willem Dafoe, and one with Jim Isaacs, who is the visual effects supervisor. So they do include those as well. They had been included, I believe, on previous releases. I don't know if it was DVD or Blu-ray, that I think had gone long out of print by this point in time. Overall, as far as a package, you can tell this is a really stacked release, especially when it comes to the supplements. The film looks really good. It's a really interesting film, but there's also a lot in here to watch and revisit and go back to, which is a really nice surprise to see, in something like this where, I've talked about the loving kind of TLC that Vinegar Syndrome is known for. It was a really good introduction to that, to be able to really have this real wealth of material to go back in. It really goes into the whole film school in a box idea of physical media. Packaging in the standard edition, it did come just sort of with standard artwork. No booklet in with these ones. In fact, Vinegar Syndrome typically does not do a lot as far as the booklets, at least from the 3 releases that I looked at. So there wasn't any extra essays or reading material to go with the edition I had. The slipcover edition, the limited edition, it does look very cool. It is out of print, so it is a little bit more expensive on the secondary market. But the standard edition I have is a really nice kind of visual presentation, a bit of a tie-in to the opening credits. And I was very, very impressed by this as a release, and for a release of a film that I had seen before. I think it really stood out. The second of the 3 Vinegar Syndrome titles that I checked out is a special edition. Actually, quite a special edition, if I do say so myself. This is the special edition for the 1973 film Flesh for Frankenstein, which is directed by Paul Morrissey, who was very well known in the 60s and early 70s for directing films that were produced by Andy Warhol, as part of the whole Andy Warhol factory scene. Before this film, he had done 3 directorial films kind of in a row in New York City: Flesh, Trash, and Heat. very, very low budget films, a lot of them using, inexperienced actors, sometimes even non-actors. I haven't actually seen any of these three films, but on the basis of creating these films with Andy Warhol, Paul Morrissey and Andy Warhol were actually able to get a 2-film deal with a very well-known producer in Italy by the name of Carlo Ponti. And basically they, met with Carlo Ponti. He wanted them to produce 2 kind of creature horror films, Frankenstein and Dracula. And when they went over to meet him, basically he gave them a $300,000 budget to make both of these movies, but they only had 3 weeks to shoot each one, which is very much kind of fit their MO. They usually didn't take a lot of time to shoot their films on a very low budget, but they were able to sign this deal with Carlo Ponti. And to do this, they were actually able to make the films at the famous Roman Cinecittà studio, which has been responsible for some of the greatest Italian cinema of all time, and is Cinecittà is a studio known around the world. And they had all of this money that they weren't used to making. I believe from some of the supplements, Paul Morrissey had mentioned that they were used to making films for $20,000, and suddenly they had $300,000 to make these films. So they had this money, and they also had this studio where they had access to a lot of master craftspeople, whether it was cinematographers, whether it was effects people, whether it was costume designers. So they made these 2 films that are really quite sumptuous as far as the visuals go. For a quote unquote lowbrow horror film, and it very much is that. They look wonderful. And Flesh for Frankenstein is one of the films that was made here. The other of these films is called Blood for Dracula. Now, I am familiar with both of these films. I have seen both of them. In fact, I own both of them on their very early DVD editions from the Criterion Collection. Criterion produced these within, I think, the first 50 DVD releases that they ever did. And kind of unique films to be in the Criterion Collection. They're not typically known for their low budget B horror or even D horror films at all. But because of what I mentioned, because they were shot in these really famous studios, look gorgeous. They kind of fit the Criterion MO of things. Don't get me wrong, the films themselves are quite funny a lot of the time. Some of them intentionally, some of them not. A lot of both movies were written either the night before or the day of shooting, so they didn't really have a fully finished script going into it. They would just write as they go, because that was Paul Morrissey's way of doing it. So not even the actors really knew exactly what they were doing. And the main actors in the films were relatively inexperienced, also not necessarily working to fit a quote-unquote mold. And one of the reasons I can say that in Flesh for Frankenstein, it's taking place in Eastern Europe, essentially, and somewhere, I think, in the Slavic nations. They mentioned Serbia at one point in time. I'm not sure if it's meant to be taking place in Serbia, but it is certainly mentioned. But the main actor, Udo Kier, is German, quite German, and makes no effort to conceal his German accent, even though he's not supposed to be playing a German character. You also have the actor Joe D'Alessandro, who is from Brooklyn. He's a very heavy Brooklyn accent, and was in Paul Morrissey's other films. In fact, they brought him over for these films, and he went on to have quite a long career, actually, in a huge number of films, even up until recently. And he is doing his New York accent. he is absolutely not concerned with not doing a New York accent. The accents are all over the place, but that's sort of hilarious and kind of the point in a lot of ways with both films. And in this case, the Vinegar Syndrome version that I looked at was Flesh for Frankenstein. So one of the unique features of the film Flesh for Frankenstein is that it was shot to be showcased in theaters in 3D. Now, 1973 would certainly not be the first time that a 3D film was shot. The older, like House of Wax type of horror movies were also designed to be done in 3D in that, I don't know the name for it, but, the type of 3D where you're wearing the glasses with the one red cell and one blue cell to kind of give the impression. And then they do some color grading with the film itself to make it appear in 3D. At this point in time, there had been some advances in 3D camera technology. They go into it a little bit in some of the special features here, but this is a film that was shot and intended to be shown in 3D. So what Vinegar Syndrome did with the special edition, which is the version that I have, is make it a box set with two versions of the film. So we have Flesh for Frankenstein in one of the discs in both 4K and in Blu-ray. And then you have the 3D version of Flesh for Frankenstein on two different Blu-ray discs for the Blu-ray and the special edition. And they do actually offer two different ways to view the film in 3D, which I thought was really interesting. Because in modern times, if you've ever watched a 3D movie, let's say in the theaters, or maybe you have a 3D Blu-ray player and you have watched a physical media version at home with that kind of unique player, you know that you kind of have those like digital 3D glasses that have a little bit of tint to them. They're very unique. If anyone went to the theater to watch a movie like Avatar, or they still do have some 3D movies these days, even though they're less prevalent now. But they do offer both versions on the Blu-ray. So if you have a 3D Blu-ray player at home, then you can watch the digital 3D version by selecting that version on the menu at the beginning. You can also watch the old school red eye, blue eye, like analog's the wrong word. But you know what I'm talking about here. You can watch it in that version. And I know you can, because I actually did that after watching the original version again on 4K. They include two sets of glasses within the Blu-ray release, which is kind of hilarious. They are very, very low budget, just like those glasses are. They actually have like a little bit of a graphic on the side that says Flesh for Frankenstein. It's a nice little touch to kind of get the impression of what seeing the film in the old school 3D would have been. It also, told me just how old I am now. I don't normally need my glasses when I'm watching movies. I normally just use it for reading up close. Yeah, those glasses were not agreeing with my my vision in my old age. So what I did was put my glasses on to watch the movie, and then put those red and blue lensed ones over top of my glasses. I'm sure I looked hilariously funny doing it, but did get a chance to watch, a good amount of the film in 3D. Was really interesting, I will say, even though it was a little hard on my eyes, because having seen the film before, and even knowing it was meant to be shot in, shown in 3D, you really don't get the full impression of that until you actually watch it in 3D and you see certain shots where you're like, oh yeah, there is very clearly something sticking straight out at you, like a body part, or there's a shot where they go into a room where the family's children sleep, and they have a fish tank with piranhas that are right up front in the frame, and you can very clearly see there's the depth of field that the 3D brings into it. It's gimmicky for sure, but it's really kind of interesting. I'm sure the digital 3D probably looks even better, but it was a nice little inclusion. I think as a special edition feature for this film in particular, I really like that. as something that is unique. And even though I kind of thought, I was like, oh yeah, this is funny, haha, it's a throwback and schlock, I did actually appreciate watching the film in 3D, certainly bits of it in 3D. If you have better eyes than me, it's probably less hard on your eyes too, so that's probably even better. As far as the supplements on the discs go, there is a commentary track by a trio of film historians, Sam Dagan, Heather Drain, and Kat Ellinger. There are a whole bunch of interviews in this one as well, and you can kind of sense a bit of a pattern emerging with the Vinegar Syndrome releases, in that they have a commentary. They also have a lot of interviews. I believe most of these were relatively new interviews too. There is quite a long interview with director Paul Morrissey. Quite an interesting interview. He's quite an interesting guy. He had some fun insights about the film. He had some very interesting opinions about working with Andy Warhol specifically. I think he may have felt a bit slighted that maybe he felt he should have gotten more credit for them. He goes into that. He also has some very interesting opinions about modern filmmaking and that sort of thing, which was, you know, a little rambly at times, but the interview itself was pretty interesting to watch. There's an interview with Udo Kier, the German actor that I mentioned. Now, Udo is still working. He's somebody that has had quite a long movie career. This is one of the first films he had ever done where he was speaking English. You can tell a little bit, and I think even with some of the other actors that, you know, had quite a heavy accent, you could tell some of them that this was maybe the first time they were delivering lines in English. It did make for some really funny moments. This movie's filled with really funny lines. Yeah, if you're interested, just check out the movie. There's some really funny parts to it. But Udo Kier's a really kind of dynamic figure. So he's had a very interesting career. He talked a little bit about getting discovered. He was in both Flesh for Frankenstein and Blood for Dracula in very prominent roles. So this was one of kind of his real big breaks in the film industry as an actor. They also talked to Joe D'Alessandro, who is also someone that worked frequently with Paul Morrissey, all of those earlier films I mentioned, and also several others going forward. He was kind of known for being a very good-looking young man. He was in this film, you know, and didn't really have a lot of qualms with being naked on screen. You know, he was a model as well, and part of these films being kind of in the area they're in initially when they released, they're both X-rated films. There is, you know, there is a good amount of that kind of sexploitation bent to these films, so they're a little bit risque for the times, and even now you kind of go like, oh, okay, this is something that films of the underground of that era were kind of doing and pushing boundaries for. And you know, Joe is an actor in all these films. He's again somebody with a very interesting personality. Has had a long career, although he, you know, has had twists and turns along the way with it. But he was really interesting to hear talk about this film because he did work with Paul Morrissey quite a bit. There is a couple of other interviews in English, one with producer Andrew Bronsberg and another with film historian Stephen Thrower, both about kind of how the film production went about, which was a very, very interesting, dynamic, unique process, as you can probably tell by some of the descriptions that I've been giving of it. And Stephen Thrower talking about the history of the film and some of the history of how it was released and how it was received and how it's kind of grown over time into this cult horror movie, monster movie, kind of schlocky classic. Then there's actually a trio of interviews that are all done in Italian because they are with an actress and two of the production people that were from Italy, that were hired as part of being at Cinecittà Studios, at least for the art director Gianni Giovannoni and the assistant director Paolo Petrangeli. They were kind of very familiar to the Cinecittà Studios and with a lot of people that were working there, and they were sort of, you know, people for hire that were available to be making these films in Italy as they had been contracted out to do. And there's also a short interview with actress Liu Bosasio, or sorry, Bosisio, I believe is the way you pronounce that. I'm probably butchering it. But she played a small role of the housekeeper in the film. She did not speak any English when she went into it, and she typically did not act in horror films. She typically was in a lot of more serious, dramatic films. And she talked about her experience of being on the film and shooting very quickly and working in this very unique style. And, talking about having some entrails, coming out of her at one point as she is a victim of dies in a very unique way. But they all talk about the unique way that the film was shot, the unique way that the art direction, some of the effects, a lot of the effects, especially the gore of it, being a Frankenstein film about putting parts of people all together to make one large kind of monster, and in this film it's two, it's a male and a female. They did use a lot of real animal parts. They had I guess a deal at that point in time where they would get entrails from a local butcher to use in a really small window, to be able to say, okay, we have these intestines that are real. I don't know if it's pig intestines, whatever it is, but they kind of were like, hey, we had to use these within like an hour or two. So when we got them to set, did one or two takes, and that was it. And also a lot of other different things. It's a really interesting looking film, and Gianni really does talk about the look and feel, and even Paolo being an assistant director, of just how the work was being done, and just how kind of fantastic this film looks for being a real kind of so bad it's good type of monster movie. They look phenomenal. And so hearing them speak about it specifically in these interviews was really, really interesting. There are also a few other smaller pieces of content in here. There's an audio kind of track recollection with Paul Morrissey that doesn't necessarily go as a commentary or anything. It's just more something to listen to, podcast style. And there's also some screen test footage as well that Morrissey shot in different kind of parts of pre-production to get ready over a very quick period of time. Overall, the packaging of this film is really excellent. This comes in, a double thick kind of hard cover. Even like I said, the slip covers on their regular limited releases are kind of the double thick cardboard. This is even thicker than that. This is a true hard box that it comes into. And mentioned both having the regular 4K version and the 3D on Blu-ray. They actually both come in their own separate cases with their own separate slip covers. So you really get a nice premium package in with the Flesh for Frankenstein version. I mentioned the 3D glasses as well. Kind of a fun little touch to be able to experience the film in that way. They did also include in the edition I got, yes, there was some sort of an issue with the color grading on one of the versions. And so they did reissue the Blu-ray disc for the non-3D version, which because I bought it brand new, they actually just inserted it directly into the packaging before it was shrink wrapped. So that is a nice touch. They didn't go back in and redo the disc. I know some people like to collect those sort of things or misprints or whatever. I'm not one of those people, but it was nice to have everything kind of included, even with recalled discs and that sort of thing. So yeah, a really nice touch to this one. The really nice packaging. It's kind of a fun, the packaging looks like it's skin that's been stitched together, and it stitches across the name Frankenstein. It's a nice piece of art to kind of go with it. Both the slip covers on each of the versions also are really nice, kind of depicting one, I think, older poster art, and another one that looked a little bit more unique maybe to the release. So again, I really impressed with this as a piece of packaging for physical media. The third film that I checked out is one from one of the Vinegar Syndrome sub-labels. It is from the Vinegar Syndrome Labs label. It is the limited edition with just a simple slipcover, and it's for a Western. So fitting in with the labs of kind of branching out into genres that Vinegar Syndrome doesn't normally do. It is for the film Five Card Stud from 1968, directed by Henry Hathaway, who is a relatively decently known, more classical Hollywood director that would go on to make a lot of other quite well-known films, probably the most well-known of which being another Western, True Grit, with John Wayne. It's a film that stars Dean Martin as well as Robert Mitchum. It also stars Inger Stevens, Roddy McDowall, and a very young Yaphet Kotto, who I actually also recently saw in a film called Across 110th Street, which is a quite a famous kind of blaxploitation film that was really interesting. Yeah, if you haven't seen Across 110th Street and you're into that kind of gritty, blaxploitation crime drama type of thing, it's really, really good. And he's very young in this film, and he's very, very good, actually. He plays a really interesting character. This entire film fits into Vinegar Syndrome in a really interesting way. And even though it's in the labs area of it, it's a Paramount Pictures film, so it's one that they would have picked up probably after Olive Films went defunct, the label that did a lot of boutique releases for Paramount Films. And, this one is a little bit of a newer release. But it fits into Vinegar Syndrome because it is a Western that really is paced and written kind of like a slasher film. If you think of like a slasher horror film being the type of one where, people are getting picked off one by one, think something like I Know What You Did Last Summer or Scream, that type of sequencing, like, oh, people are going to die, people are going to die, people are going to die until there's only one person left. It kind of works within that convention and actually does have, several scenes that are, I wouldn't call them gory necessarily, but relatively shocking in some of the deaths and the way people die in the film. So it actually is a really, really interesting kind of crossover. And I think this is if this is the type of stuff Vinegar Syndrome Labs does as a label, I really commend them for that, because I think this is a really unique way to explore, like they said, something they don't normally do, but also kind of does fit in an adjacent way to something that is their bread and butter. It was really unique to watch. I actually really enjoyed this film quite a bit. I've been on a little bit of a kick over the last year or two of going into some older Westerns, and some of the ones that are maybe a little bit more like cynical or hard-bitten, Anthony Mann Westerns, stuff with James Stewart. I've been on a bit of a kick like this. So this was kind of the perfect film for me to branch out and get into the Vinegar Syndrome stuff with. As far as how the film looks, it is a color film. So, one that was not an early color film, but one that, has that sort of early Western in color. So some muted tones, but also having some pops here and there of some really vibrant visual colors. There's a couple of bits in this film that aren't quite what we're going to call up to how the rest of the film is restored, and I have a feeling that probably has a lot to do with the source material that they were able to get their hands on with the old film stocks. I mean, this is we talked about the Vinegar Syndrome that this label is based around. It wouldn't be surprised if there was some real serious damage with the original and negative to this film, because there's a one kind of scene in particular at the beginning that involves a poker game. The film with the name Five Card Stud, I suppose that makes sense. That it doesn't quite look as good. It's a little bit blurry and you can tell, but this lasts for maybe a minute, and then the rest of the film really does look quite nice. Does still look like a film that was shot in the 60s, does still retain that quality of that era of color film. There's some low light parts and things that take place at night during this film. Given that it kind of is paced like a horror movie, this does make sense. It does look really, really good for what they have with it, minus the early bit. But I think that for older films, I've kind of learned as being a lover of old films to kind of forgive that. And you can't always work miracles. Sometimes you can, but I think they did probably the best they could with restoring this one. Of the 3 releases that I'm looking at, 5-Card Stud is the one that is what I would call the leanest as far as the supplements go. So what it packs into this edition is a commentary track from an author and film historian named Brian Hanan, who is someone that has done some writing about the Western genre, and in particular several films from Henry Hathaway. So he did have a lot of really interesting kind of critical assessments of different parts of the film and how it fits into the canon of that kind of late 60s Western, right in between sort of certain eras of maybe something like a High Noon or an even older kind of, John Wayne Western, going into something a little bit more progressive into the 70s, something like True Grit, which of course Henry Hathaway was also involved with and did star John Wayne as well. And so I think it was a really, really nice commentary track, really insightful to have that kind of go into that commentary. There's also a couple of featurettes that go in with the disc on this one. One specifically related to the director Henry Hathaway, called Jack of All Trades, and it is hosted and spoken on by a critic named Walter Chaw, who is a little bit of has done quite a bit of research about Henry Hathaway and has really able to put 5-Card Stud into the perspective of Henry Hathaway's career and what Henry Hathaway kind of did really, really well as a director that did certainly a lot of westerns, but also did a lot of other genre films, as a lot of other filmmakers did in that kind of classic Hollywood period, and kind of puts him into a context of someone that maybe isn't as big a name as some other directors of that era, but still did direct some really unique and engaging and worthwhile films in that era. The second featurette on this disc is a one called A Woman of True Grit, which actually this was my favorite. I think one of my favorite features that I checked out in all 3 of these discs, if I'm being honest with you. It is a bit of a featurette and also a little bit of an interview with Lizzie Frank, talking about the screenwriter of this film, Marguerite Roberts. It was a female that wrote this film, and actually she was well known for writing a lot of genre films in this era of Hollywood. And she has a very interesting story about her, because she wrote a lot of films in even earlier periods to this, decades before. And this was a time when women were not usually given the, jobs at a studio of the kind of importance of a screenwriter. And she kind of worked her way into working in the screenwriting department at the studio she was at, and eventually was just trusted to be the head writer and kind of chief writer on a lot of different movies, because the movies she was writing were well received, made a lot of money, and she, because of that, tended to have a lot of pull in what she was doing. And she then found herself in a situation where she was actually blacklisted from Hollywood because her husband was a member of the Communist Party. And at the time, when the McCarthyism era was going on in the United States and going through Hollywood, she refused to name names and was effectively blacklisted for quite some time. And this film in the late 60s is one of the films that kind of got her back into being a screenwriter of note again, and not screenwriting under a pseudonym, which she and a lot of other screenwriters did in that era. Anybody that's familiar with someone like Dalton Trumbo or Ring Lardner Jr. will sort of know that that's a familiar story with any blacklisted writers. But she really excelled at these kind of genre pictures westerns in particular. In fact, she would go on to also write True Grit, hence the title of the featurette, A Woman of True Grit, that Henry Hathaway also directed. And she really made her name in a very male dominated world, both early on as a screenwriter and by being a female writer for these genre pictures. I think it actually does, lend an interesting bent to the story in this film. The violence and some of the leanings politically. You could probably tell that the writer of the film was maybe a little left leaning in that, which I certainly don't mind at all. And I think it lends something really interesting to this film, to a lot of other films. I would actually really love to go back and revisit some of the other films that she has written. I have seen True Grit, but it'd be really interesting to go back and watch some of these other ones. So that may be something I do on my own after seeing this. But that's all of the features that were on this release for 5-card studs. So certainly not as stacked as the other two in the supplements department, although they are really nice supplements. I think anytime you can include a couple of featurettes and a commentary track, you're going to be pretty happy as long as they're providing some interesting insight. And everything that was on the disc for 5-card stud, I think really did. As far as packaging goes, again, no booklet in this one, just like with the other two. The slipcover is really nice. The artwork on the slipcover is very, very nice. It is in that kind of old Hollywood hand-drawn style. It's this very striking red and yellow sort of character being shot or in a shootout with cards on it. It's really quite nice. It sort of fits in with a bit of the dusty color vibe that the cinematography gives off in the film. And yeah, as far as a smaller release compared to the other two, but was very impressed with it. And the Vinegar Syndrome Labs line, I feel like I don't know if it's one that maybe everybody would necessarily check out, knowing the people that really love Vinegar Syndrome stuff, but highly recommend. Really, really enjoyed that. As someone that maybe is a little bit outside of what Vinegar Syndrome typically would want to do, this might be a line that I would be really interested in checking out more from, because it seems like they're doing something really interesting with it. And I really hope they keep up the Vinegar Syndrome Labs line. So overall impressions of Vinegar Syndrome as a label, are really positive for me. I can see why a lot of the reputation that precedes it from, a lot of the research that I'd done or some of the opinions that have heard about with Vinegar Syndrome releases, I think they're really warranted. I think this is a label that seems to take a lot of care, a lot of pride in what they do. I really appreciate and love that they work with the OCN Digital Labs and Distribution in-house. I personally, I think that's a great business model. It's a little bit like a vinyl record label having their own pressing plant. I think having all of that really, really close and in-house just means everybody can work together in a way that just seems to bring everything together really nicely. It's sort of an intangible thing, I guess, but I do really like that. It seems like they have some really nice synergy in the art that they're trying to put out there and the physical media releases for collectors that they're trying to put out there. It also, their website, I have bought stuff on their website in person, and also, as I mentioned, in the Toronto store physically. I think they curate a really nice experience for collectors, for going online, for the different sales that they run. They do also seem to rotate through certain things of saying, hey, we're going to have 10 releases at 30, 40, 50% off kind of randomly. So if you go back and look through their website a little bit, you may be able to find certain things on a decent sale, even if it's not on one of their quote unquote official sales. And everything is also really nicely organized. You can go by the sub labels, by the partner labels, looking by price. Some, if you're looking for things that are maybe out of print, even going out of print. I actually really enjoy that they do this on their website of any releases that they know are going to go out of print, they do have like a search tab that you can go and say, oh, this is going out of print. This is, maybe I want to pick this up at retail at that point in time. I think it's a really nice touch that they do. There's a little bit of transparency to it, but also very collector friendly. And I think that kind of boils down to what I feel about them as a label, is that they do feel really much, like they really value the customer base that they have, and they really want to produce great editions for the people that are going to be watching the films. And I really like that. I think, there's a lot of collectability to what they do if you're interested in those genres or those areas. And, even though slipcovers may not be a thing that everybody's interested in, if it's the kind of thing you are interested in, they're about as good as you can get as far as quality goes in the boutique label business. So, if you're interested in Vinegar Syndrome, if you have an interest in genre films, or if anything I've chatted about sounds kind of interesting, partner labels, that kind of thing, I would definitely go and check them out. Now is actually probably a good time. I'm recording this in kind of that late October time. It's going to come out early November. And, they are about to come up on a Black Friday sale, and maybe a good time to pick up something if you are interested in checking them out for a first time. It's what I did. Several of these I picked up at their halfway to Black Friday sale, so they've been on the shelf for a bit, waiting for me to check them out. And yeah, I really have enjoyed discovering what the main line of Vinegar Syndrome has had to offer. I'm looking forward to diving into more as I see more releases that I really enjoy from them. Like I said, I really would like to go into a deep dive discovery on Cinematograph. I also am going to be talking about some of the partner labels that I have some releases for that I love. I know I will most definitely be doing one about Canadian International Pictures. Soft spot in my heart for them. I absolutely love what they do. And yeah, I think, I mentioned Black Friday. We are coming into that time of year where there will start to be a lot of sales. And in particular, also in November, the Criterion Collection sale at Barnes & Noble. So my next episode, I want to do a second edition of the Criterion Hall of Fame, just to kind of go into the Criterion sale time of year, to maybe provide a couple of recommendations for people that may be looking for something at the Barnes & Noble sale. And I'd also like to do an episode about sales and about how, as collectors, we approach sales, and maybe some tips or some things to think about as you go into the Black Friday sale, or indeed any other sale at any other time of year. So can look forward to that coming up from Cinema on a Shelf. Thank you once again for listening to this episode. My name is Matt. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.